All of a sudden, here I was in Sydney. Somehow, I'd emerged a victor from the mess that is the Sydney rental crisis and managed to secure a spot in a share house. My street was in a quiet neighbourhood dotted by community book swap boxes, Plains Landing, and since my arrival coincided right on the tail of summer, frangipangi flowers. Suddenly, I had a room to make my own again. After I unpacked and designated what drawer and what shelf would hold what, there was a new question waiting for me. A very loud question. What happens next? Life? At that point, I had 2 weeks before the start of semester to do absolutely anything. Oh, apart from break the conditions of my exchange and get sent home, that is. This time, I wanted to pace myself and slow it right down. I hopped around the inner west area where I was newly based and spent a bit of time in the suburbs before venturing out to go see Sydney's bigger landmarks. There was the Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, waterfront promenades, light rails, cockatoos and bin chickens and a twangier accent, but I still constantly sought out more signs and reminders to process just where I was. Even though it was already late summer, Sydney was so warm that it just feels like you're dreaming every day, that confusingly long type of dream found only in an accidental afternoon nap. The evenings are never fully black in the suburbs, always faded slightly purple. On the first night, I lay awake for a long time after I'd turned off the lights, wearing off the excitement that miraculously I wasn't homeless and things had all worked out. Outside, the sky was so bright that the windows would crop its glow into 2 rectangles and hang them on my wall. I got up to look, wondering if the moon was out. Nope, only planes crossing back and forth. Occasionally, a moth would knock on the glass, and a small shadow zipped across the pale rectangles, way too sharp to be a bird, and moving in precise, agile loops, and then gone. That was how I saw my first bat, or its silhouette technically. By the end of the week, I was relieved to discover that my room did, in fact, have window blinds, and falling asleep had been relatively easier ever since. I ended up share housing with a couple in their 40s. I can attest that they have a fully stocked spice drawer, and from what I could smell around the house, they cook incredibly well. Their friends often dropped in to stay a night or two, and they spend a lot of their weekends away. On their fridge were postcards sent from family who had been travelling in Europe, and on the opposite wall, pictures from mushrooming and hiking excursions, and group photos taken with the flash on after dark. Even now, I still think to myself, what a strange and unique opportunity this was to have such an exclusive look into someone else's private daily spaces, rhythms, and patterns. It did take me a couple of weeks to internally register and attach the words "my room" to this space, and it was a bit strange to say things like "I'm going home" when you're referring to a house that isn't quite yours. I'm still trying to lean into the idea that my home is everywhere, it's in the now, and that way I won't ever feel lost. Well, that's the plan anyhow. There is this distinct mindset shift when you move from being in a place to travel to being in a place to live. You kind of go from, I gotta see all these places that people are recommending, to where do I want to be today, right now?
So I'm just in the Royal Botanic Gardens right now, and I just realized that actually I think I don't want to be going to all these like parks and places as a tourist. I just kind of want to swing by, for example, after a full day of classes, or just on a weekend to catch a sunset or talk with a friend. And I think you always want to just feel at home, like you want a sense of like, this is my city now, and even if you're not from there, because you are here, you're in the space, you're in the place, and it is yours to explore and to live your life in, I guess. You see the magpie? Yo-ho!
even as I thought about this back in February, I knew that my 4 and a bit months in Sydney was going to fly past, and I just couldn't help but want to pack everything in while I was there. I go looking for neat little places like bookstores, but then realize, all these books, but I didn't actually want to read anything. I needed to be moving, not sitting reading. There'd be lots of time for that once uni started up. There's enough sitting on the bus and the train, and I was already preoccupied with reading what's out the window. As you can tell, this whole getting comfortable with how I spend my time thing was still, and is still, a work in progress. But finally moving out, even if it wasn't a permanent arrangement, though I avoided thinking about that, and living in a new city for the first time had brought me new revelations. You wake up and you feel like you could get yourself anywhere. And it wasn't like I was unfree before, back when I was in Auckland. It's just that suddenly you loosen up inside and grow into the space that was probably always meant to be there. I started to really enjoy cooking my own meals. This buzz was not a phase nor fueled by novelty. Growing up in Aotearoa, New Zealand as an overseas-born Chinese, my family did make an effort to keep up with the tradition of making specific foods during cultural celebrations, but never followed them super closely. Being away from home all of a sudden, though, skewered me with this new determination to exercise this aspect of my Chinese heritage. Over Lunar New Year, I made dumplings from scratch, which I did not film very diligently because I constantly had flour or traces of beef mince on my hands.
Well, I was making dumplings, but now I'm walking to the service station to get some more flour.
I also whipped up a tofu mince, since one of the housemates was vegetarian. Hot tip, making dumplings is absolutely a group activity. Don't go making them on your own like I did. Go team up with your friends and have a party. A few weeks later, it was time to make tangyuar, despite being a few days behind the full moon, which is when you're supposed to eat them. There's something really homely about following these kinds of rituals or activities that people do collectively at the same time. And most of all, there's a kind of empowerment that comes from being able to take these skills with you wherever you go.
I can hear people screaming from the amusement park and Luna Park that's just next door.
I made the point of treating myself to a lot of walks, catching up with friends I hadn't seen in ages, packed lunches, more walks, and soaking absolutely everything up.
I've noticed the cicadas here have this really interesting thing where they just start out of nowhere.
Stories about other people's lives, the flora and fauna unique to this little pocket of the world, and finding a different cruise ship parked in Circular Quay every time I passed by. As quickly as I was settling in, and as much as I was grateful for that, I also secretly hoped that I wouldn't get too complacent and too used to it all. Before I knew it, the new semester was out to catch me back into the cycle of assigned readings and commutes, and the being surprised that it's already Thursday again. During one of my first weekends in Sydney, a close friend of my housemates came to visit after years based up in Queensland, and I was kindly invited to come along with them on an afternoon swim. That drive was my first non-public transport passenger experience since arriving in Australia. Sydney looks and feels very different from a moving car, or perhaps it was because the drivers here are so intense. I was so busy looking out the window, I must have looked like I'd never been in a car before. As we wound our way towards the coast, the friend remarked on how everything's changed since the time she last lived here, pointing out the new train station and the big shopping block that wasn't there before. For me, at least for the time being, everything was tinged with novelty. The friend seemed to notice this, and she turned to me sitting in the back seat and said, "You're just like me. You've got fresh eyes."